Okay, so it's 6:30. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know a lot of people were here earlier as we set up. So if you're just coming in now, don't worry, you didn't miss anything. We were just getting everything fine-tuned. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We have a very special talk by Dr. Jon Spenard, Communing with the Earth and Ancestors, Ancient Maya Cave Rituals in Central Belize. My name is Stephanie Sandoval, and I'm the Public Archaeology Director at the San Diego Archaeological Center. The center is a nonprofit dedicated to the preservation of local archaeological collections. And in addition to our state-of-the-art curation and research facility, we also have a museum and focus on providing high-quality educational programs to kids and adults. Although the center is currently closed to the public due to COVID, we are pleased to be able to connect with you through these virtual programs. Please visit our website for more information on the center, membership options, and upcoming events, like our next living room lecture. It is on Thursday, March 18th, Polynesian Contact with the Americas, an update by Dr. Terry Jones. Information and registration can be found on our website at sandiegoarchaeology.org. Tonight, we will be using the Q&A feature, and you can find that on your Zoom control panel. Feel free to submit questions at any time. However, they will be answered at the end of the presentation. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Jon Spenard this evening. He is an assistant professor of anthropology at Cal State San Marcos, and his current project, the Rio Frio Regional Archaeological Project, is an investigation of settlement and ritual cave sites in a largely unstudied area of central Belize. With over 20 years of experience in the Maya world, Dr. Spenard has conducted research elsewhere in Belize, Guatemala, and Mexico for his graduate degrees. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jon Spenard.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. And thank you everybody who made it out tonight. I'm really excited to be giving this talk here. And let me let's see, here we go. Share the screen here with you. And before I get started, I promised my kids, who have been very patiently letting me get this talk together for you also. Before I begin, I just want to say hi, Ellie. Hi, Shar. I will see you very soon, and I love you. And thank you for letting me get this talk together for everybody. All right. So with that, I'm going to talk to you tonight about cave rituals. And when we think about the ancient Maya, and when we hear the ancient Maya, we often think about massive pyramids, these big cities. Many people might be familiar with these places because of tourist interest, right? Familiar with Chichen Itza, maybe Tulum down on the coast of Cozumel. But we tend to think about these massive, large cities, right? These towering pyramids stretching over the jungle. These mountains. Okay. And they were built mountains, undoubtedly. And these pyramids were parts of big cities, small cities. Okay? But these are artificial mountains that reach up to the sky. And so when we think about the ancient Maya, we tend to think about up, right? We tend to think about the sky. Okay? But what we don't think about, well, right? We look up at the sky, we see these towering pyramids looking out over the jungle, these towering cities looking out over the countryside. But again, beneath these massive cities lies an underworld that's largely unseen and largely unknown. That was very much an everyday part of Maya life. Some of these places are massive, and we'll take a look at some of these here coming up. Some of these places are small. So small that you need your friend's boot to pull you out of the place. But big or small, no matter where we look at these places, whatever crack and crevice we look into, we find evidence of Maya use, Maya modification. What you're looking at here, let me turn my laser pointer on. Okay, what we're looking at here is an ancient wall, an ancient terrace, built seemingly to differentiate between inside cave space and the outside space. We see architecture like this is throughout caves. This is an ancient wall inside of a cave that separates this small antechamber here from the larger chamber outside. And these these little bars down the bottom here and on the side here, these are actually scale bars, and for some cool technology that we're doing on the project, and I'll share that with you all coming up here. So we get architecture, we get burning, a lot of burning. This is a small altar cut from a cave formation called a curtain. And these walls should be stark white, but they're black. They've been charred from an intense burning. This floor, the soil here should be this sort of dark orange, but instead it's black. It's all charcoal. There was a massive, massive burning event that happened here. And of course, pottery. This jar is about 2 feet tall. So from whole pots to smashed pieces, which we'll see some coming up, everywhere we look underground, in these underground places, we find evidence of ritual use of them. And when I say everywhere, I really do mean everywhere. This right here is just a boulder that had fallen off of the cliff, off of a cliff, perhaps millions of years ago. I wound up excavating under here and didn't go down very far, but what I found were the same kind of ritual paraphernalia that I would find in caves. For Maya people of the past, this was a cave. So this perception of the underworld is a little bit different than ours, and I'll come back to that here in a few minutes. But when we look at the geography of the Maya area, it's understandable that caves were so important to the ancient Maya, because this whole area here, millions of years ago, was seafloor. It was a very shallow sea, and it became over those millions of years, it became a limestone shelf. And when the sea levels rose or sea levels fell, as the water drained off of the land, it formed massive cave systems. Some big, some small, right? But it formed millions of caves. So just I do want to differentiate here a few different areas, because I'll be talking about them throughout the talk. So the northern area, I'm not going to really touch on that very much. I'm going to be focusing on this area down here. But the northern area is filled with caves, but many of the caves are now underwater, and much of all the rivers that flow in this area actually flow underwater up here through these cave systems. So these caves these cave systems up in the northern area are sort of the source of life for this area. The central area that I'm going to be talking about mostly today is where we see the most several large cave systems, as well as this is sort of considered to be sort of the core area of classic period Maya. And I'll talk to you in just a minute here about what the different time periods of the Maya too, to give us some background here. Okay. But this is the area that I'm going to be focusing on tonight. And then the southern area here, I'm not going to be talking about this really at all, just except to note that it's vastly different. It's a tectonic area. It's where plates have collided in, so it's a volcanic highlands. And so you get a very different type of geology here. And so we get very few caves. There are a few. There's small rock shelters and things like that. But we do see a unique cultural practice up here that we don't see very commonly in the northern and central areas. And that is when the ancient Maya built sites up here, they'd actually excavate artificial caves underneath their cities. And that suggests to us that these caves are something special. There's something that seems to be in the mindset of Maya people. Caves were places that were of vital importance to communities, to settlements, right? They were a necessary component of life. All right, so what I want to do now is talk to you really quickly about Maya chronology. Now I know I have a lot of family here, and I have some friends who are archaeologists, and so what I want to do with this talk is give some general information about the Maya and about archaeology, and then a little bit more in-depth information for everybody. So really quickly, we'll talk about chronology, and then we'll move on to talk about cave rituals. Now, Maya chronology, we can start this with the first people to come to the Americas. Now, this is a topic that's long been debated about in archaeology, and in fact, it's sort of where the discipline originated from. But what we can say for now is we can estimate that the first people came to the Americas somewhere around 15,000 years ago. That's what the archaeology tells us. The archaeological data tell us. And we call this the Paleo-American period. And this spanned roughly 600 or 800 years, or 8,000 years. And these are the first people into the Americas. They're hunter-gatherers. And there's some really great research going on up in the northern area right now by some colleagues of mine in those submerged caves, that we do find that they're finding that the first use of caves actually dates to this sometime in this time period. Now, they don't know for sure what they were doing in there, but people were in there. We find evidence, they're finding evidence of people visiting the caves. So we have some really early use of caves and rock shelters in the northern area, but then also in southern Belize as well. So this is a really exciting avenue of research that's going on right now, that speaks to the long interaction that people who eventually became Maya had with this world, this underground world. The next period is the Archaic Period. And this is a time period that happened after the Ice Age. And we see massive global climate change. And what we see is this transition that people went from nomadic hunter-gatherers to cultivators of plants. And so it's during this time period where we see the origins of plant domestication. Corn or maize, beans and squash were domesticated at this time. And those went on to become the staple foods of Mexico and the Maya area and elsewhere in the Americas, right? People were still largely nomadic though, but we still do see cave and rock shelter use during this time period. Next up is the pre-classic period, from about 1200 BCE to about the year 250. And this is a period of major social political transformation. We see those cultivators became farmers who settled down. And so we see the first farming villages very quickly, within a few hundred years, become massive cities. Some of the largest cities ever in the Maya area spring up about a couple hundred years after the first village settlements. Okay. it's during this time period too that we see the origins of what becomes divine kingship or rulership. And this is the time period where we have a definitive, secure, widespread, not every single nook and cranny, but widespread use of evidence of ritual cave use rather than just seemingly visiting these caves. We don't know for certain, again, what was happening earlier, but we do know that by this point in the pre-classic period, cave ritual was a regular component of life. Now this moves us into the classic period. And this is really sort of thought about as the cultural fluorescence of the central area. The classic period is defined by carved stone monuments that have a calendar. The Maya calendar that you might be familiar with are carved on stone monuments. And it's the dates on those monuments that were written down by the Maya that define for us this period of the classic period. And it's during this time that we start where we see that all of these small, big nooks and crannies, these massive caves and these small caves, these rock shelters and boulders, right? These small, seemingly insignificant features on the landscape are being used for ritual purposes. Late classic period is we see the largest populations throughout the Maya region. It's considered to be the height of artistic achievement, great prosperity, but it's also a time of unrest and warfare. But we see intensive use of the ritual landscape continues. But during the late classic period, what we see is an increasing control of the elite, by the elite over that landscape. So I don't actually have a picture to show you all here, but for example, we would see something like building some of these massive buildings and temples directly on top of caves. Right? So the temple's on top, the cave is on the hill beneath it. Right? These kinds of statements of you put a building on top of something, you claim it as your own. Right? So we start to see, especially in the late classic period, we start to see these kinds of building activities. Then the terminal classic period is the period of the collapse, right? In the central, commonly called the collapse in the central area. A lot of political instability, climate insecurity, overpopulation, and eventual abandonment and settlements of the central area, or depopulation of the settlements in the central area. We do know that some folks stayed around, but it seems that many people moved up north, and we see the sites in the northern areas take off in the following period. But it's during this time of great unrest that we see actually a major uptick in ritual activity in the caves. And I'll come back to the reasons for that here in a little while. And then lastly, we have the post-classic period, which is the time that we see the reorganization of society, cultural fluorescence in the northern area, and reemergence of polities up north and the kingdoms up north. We do see ritual landscape use continue, but it's not so much in the central area. We see very few because the population is much smaller. People are using many fewer caves. We do see though that in the northern area, though, we see the fluorescence of ritual use in those caves up north. Okay, so with that chronology, what I want to do now is move on to talk to you about cave rituals and some of the work that I've done. So I'm actually going to focus on two areas, and what I'm going to introduce. Sort of figured I'd give talk to you all about the research I've done throughout my career, but mostly focus on the work that I'm doing now, just to provide some overall context, to give a little bit of a different perspective from different areas of the central area. So we're going to talk about this area of Belize here, and this will be our primary focus over here. And this is where I've been working now for the last, I guess 20 something years, with a few years spent down working over here. So I'm going to start down here in Guatemala, and then we'll come back over here in Belize. And I'm just going to talk about some of the, again, give a broad overview of the different types of rituals that we see, and then I'll come back to talk about why these rituals are being performed. All right, so we'll start down here in Guatemala. Now, the area that I'm working, that I worked in, was associated with the site of Conquén, which is a city that was established near the end of the late Classic period and became a major economic center in the late Classic period. And it looked like it was controlling trade coming out of the highlands. My research started out as an interest in wanting to know about these hills over here on the horizon. We thought that perhaps, based on some ethnographic research that anthropologists have done on living Maya communities, that the hills over here may have been used the same way that pyramids were being used. Now, Conquén is very different from the cities that I showed at the beginning of this talk. There are very few large pyramids there. In fact, there's maybe just one. There's a massive palace, and then a lot of settlements spread out throughout there. So I was interested in learning if these hills perhaps were being used as the pyramids for Conquén. They're pretty far away though. But what drew me there, was the fact that they looked very much like pyramids. They looked like the pyramids that had collapsed. And like the temples on top, right, the shrines on top of the pyramids, these hills were filled with caves. So I just want to talk about one here, this cave in this hill, and then I'm going to move over to Belize. Okay. So this cave was very long and narrow, as you can see here, and it's not very impressive from the outside, right? And in fact, most of it is just this tunnel, and you can see it's about a person, the width of about 5 feet wide or so. I made several excavation units throughout the cave, but I just want to tell you really quickly about this one right here. But this whole area was really interesting. Fortunately, this was early on in my graduate career, and this is one of those times you have a regret about your fieldwork, because I didn't think to actually take a picture of the thing that I talk about all the time when I talk about this place. So you get an arrow pointing to this stone right here. This is actually a piece of the cave that's flat topped, and just above it there's a small little passage that goes a little bit further in, and that's this right here. But this is it's just a natural part of the cave, but it's flat, and up in the wall up above it was this piece, this chert rock or flint rock that had flakes, pieces of rock knocked off of it, and it was stuck in the wall there. Now, what made this rock special, was that it was covered in ceramics, broken pieces of ceramics. And these were actually ceramics that were similar to those found in grave sites at the site of Conquén, and they dated to the same time period. And when I excavated this unit here, I actually did wind up finding pieces of a cranium. So we get this formation here, covered in ceramics. This chert nodule, which I should say, the other thing I found in both units 1 and 2 here were flakes of the same exact material. Like somebody had come in and just kept banging the flakes off and knocking the flakes off and knocking the flakes off. So you get this formation covered in pottery, the same kind of pottery that's found with burials at Conquén, parts of a cranium, as well as these flakes. Okay? So I'm just going to introduce these sites, and then I'll come back and talk to them more at the end of the talk here. Okay? So we're going to move over to Belize now, and I'm going to talk to you now. I'm going to introduce sites I worked on for my dissertation, and they're going to be cave sites that were up up in this area right here, centered around the site of Pogbatoon. Now, my current research project is actually right down over here. So these two cave systems here that I'm going to be talking about, they're very closely related to one another. We're looking at similar cultural practices here. So we kind of get a view from the southern Petén of Guatemala, sort of from the core area of the Maya, and then over here of the practices in Belize. So to introduce you to Pogbatoon really quickly, this site was settled in the early middle preclassic period, somewhere around 900 BC, maybe a few hundred years earlier, maybe around 1000, maybe 1100 BC. And it continues to be populated until around the year 1000. So we're looking at a city, a small city, but the average size city in this area of Belize that was inhabited for roughly 2000 years, right? But it, like many of the other cities in Belize at this time, was abandoned or depopulated. People left around somewhere between 900 to 1000. And I'll come back to those reasons why in a little bit. But I want to introduce you to the caves over here. One is Ochre Cave, which means pottery cave in Mayan, in the local Mayan language. And it was called that because when you walk in, the walls are literally lined with thousands and thousands of pieces of ceramic. The dirt, the floor of the cave is just covered in ceramics. There's millions of pieces of broken pottery in here from thousands of vessels that were brought in here and broken and during ritual performances over the years that it was being used. Right, so I'll bring you through the different areas of this cave here. But I want to first introduce another cave that's at the very bottom of the hill that Ochre is in. So Ochre is about halfway up the hillside. And then Rocky Crab Cave is at the very bottom of it. It's actually at the end of a drainage, of a seasonal drainage. And this whole arroyo here, this whole creek, actually fills up. We'll see trees stuck up here higher than this picture shows, from the amount of water that flows through here. So this is a massive drain for the surrounding landscape. And that's actually really important to understand the purpose and function of Ochre, right? Is that we see all this water going into the hill here. Now, why I talk about these two caves together, they weren't just geographically connected, right, with Rocky Crab being at the foot of the hill and Ochre being halfway up. There's actually, you can't see them here because well, you can't see them well here. They're really rough, and they weren't very noticeable, but there's actually steps that connect the two caves. So we can actually see this little pile of rubble right here is under this lip of this boulder sticking out here. And it does continue across to over here. And before we excavated, there was some more rubble here. But this is actually the ground, the bedrock right here. And so there wasn't very thick right here. But we could see as we cleared the leaf litter off this hill that there were a series of really small, crudely built steps going up the entire hillside connecting the caves. You can see a little bit here of how much this was built up with the rubble over here. Now, we know though that this was built up because between the rocks and with the rocks were large pieces of broken ceramics that were mixed in with this architectural fill. Okay? So, and they were large and rectangular in shape. These weren't things that had rolled down the hill. If they rolled down the hill, they would have broken up into smaller pieces, and been much more rounded. But these were big, thick, rectangular pieces of ceramics that were built to stabilize these hills, these steps that connected the two caves. And this is about a 60-meter walk up the hill that they built these steps. Now that staircase, the steps end here. This is an alignment of rocks right here. There's another one right here. And trees over the course of the millennia have knocked out these other ones here. But we did excavate here, and we did find that this is actually the face of an ancient platform, an earthen platform, and that they dug down about 6 feet, filled it with massive boulders, and again, large pieces of pottery to create this entrance, this platform here, to partially block off the entrance of the cave. Okay. So we're seeing this massive landscape modifications to connect Rocky Crab Cave down below with Pogbatoon Lock up above. Now we go into the cave, and you can see the entrance up here, slopes down. This is actually the only flat spot in the entire cave, is right on top of this. This is an artificial terrace here that the Maya built between this boulder sticking up out of the floor here and the cave wall here. Well, on the surface, this is about 70 centimeters tall, 60, 70 centimeters tall. So not very tall, but we dug down about 2 meters and we hit a slate floor down here. So we're down about 6 feet now. So we're down around here. Okay. And we hit a slate floor, and turns out that this is not actually the original wall. This is just a curtain that comes over the cave wall. And while we're digging, we stuck our arms all the way in and reached the actual cave wall, and we're pulling out pieces of ceramic this big. Everything you're looking at here was built up. This is a completely artificial platform going all the way to this drop of about 9 feet here down to the main cave floor below. This is the same, part of the same construction project that led to the stairs going down to Rocky Crab Cave down below. And importantly, what we found underneath that slate floor was a late to terminal classic period bowl, which tells us that this terrace and all this it dates the entire construction project, the entrance here, to the late to terminal classic period. Now dropping into the cave, so my back now, right? This is this terrace right here. We're looking at this feature in the middle of the cave here. And as you can see, there's this pavement here covered. All this up here is actually thousands of pieces of broken pottery. Most of it were these small votive offering bowls. A lot of them were burnt or had smudges in them, probably evidence of incense. And in fact, what we know from other areas is that a lot of times these bowls were actually filled with incense, just huge balls of incense put in them, and they were offerings. They were made for offerings. Right. So what we see here is that these are places where votive offerings were being made, right? Specifically centered on this formation right here. And so it seems to be an interest in these formations, these cave formations. Now at the back of the cave is the altar that I showed you at the beginning of the talk here, made from the cave formation, the cave curtain. Right? We actually got a radiocarbon date from here that puts us to puts us squarely into the terminal classic period. And in fact, this date aligns perfectly with the date of the bowl that was found at the front of the cave. So what I'm able to do is say, well, the ritual activity happening here was probably the same part of the same ritual activity that led to the transformation of the entrance of the cave, connecting it to Rocky Crab Cave. So we're seeing this massive investiture in landscape modification here, right? Again, these are the walls here. This should be stark white, but they're charred black, right, from the burning that happened here. In excavations around here, around the altar, the foot of the altar revealed hundreds of greenstone objects. Jade, right? Ear spools, and a ton of, not a ton, right? Many beads. That had been, some of that had been broken from the fire. By numbers alone, this is actually more jade that's been found at Pogbatoon, right? So this is one of the richest, if you will, jade offerings recovered from this from the Pogbatoon region by numbers, right? So this represents great wealth being in ritually left here, right? All right, so with that, what I want to do now is talk to you all about my current project. And again, I'll bring this all back into context here in a few minutes. But what I want to do is bring you all through my current project, and bring you through some of the sites. And to do that, I'm going to rely on some technology here, some of the innovative work that we're doing on this project, and it's largely the work of my colleague here, Mike Miro. So thank you, Mike, for this, and my crew here and over here. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to pause you all for a minute, if you don't mind, and I'll be right back. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing that for a second, and we will see. Right, so I do have some audio here that's going to be playing in the background. So if you do have, if you're able to, you might hear some background noise. It shouldn't overwhelm, but what you'll be hearing are some jungle sounds and sounds of the environment as I talk to you about them. Right. So turn your sound on if you have sound, and you should. Stephanie, if you could let me know if we're if we're not seeing the tour, otherwise I will proceed with it.
I see the video, and go ahead and move it again. It moves around, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so welcome to the Rio Frio Caves. What I'm going to do is we have set up a virtual site tour, if you will. And the sound just kicked in that you might be able to hear. And I'll bring you through some of the caves that we're working in and see how much time we have here to see how many of them we can see. But this cave is the one that I've been focusing on primarily. And this is if you've been to Belize, you might know this as, or if you live in Belize, this is the Twin Cave. But it was originally recorded in 1928 by an archaeologist named Gregory Mason, and he called this Rio Frio Cave A. So because that name is published, we keep those names in the project. So this is Rio Frio Cave A that we're talking about here. And so we spent summer 2019, June 2019, my team and I excavating at the entrance of the cave. We've also been mapping it and working in some of the other caves, but this has been our primary focus here. And this is just a picture of my team at work and showing sort of some of the sort of what an average moment looks like on the project here. And this is them hard at work excavating. Some of them hard at work excavating. The others are not shown here. So you got Andres, Jessica, and Javi here. All right, so we can take a look around and see what the environment's like here. Just the thick jungle. We'll go into the excavation area here. Now, we chose this area for a lot of reasons. One, because it was really easy to get to, and it was in the daylight. Now, I know I have some young family members on here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with archaeology, we put down excavation squares like this that we dig, and that tells us where we're going to dig, and we continue to dig that until we reach the bottom, wherever we decide the bottom is. And as we dig, we find things that are in the excavation unit, as we call it, and then of course we screen really carefully for any artifacts that come out of them. So this is Javi screening and Ariana excavating over here in the alcove of the cave over here. Now we put excavation units over in this area and over here because we don't know anything about these caves. And in this area here, you can see all these square little rectangles around here. All of these are pieces of pottery. And so pottery, we can know when a site dates to based on the style of pottery that's present. And so to understand when this cave was dated to, we excavated a unit here. And then what we're seeing as we move through the project, right, is I talked about architecture at the beginning. We also do see really small, subtle alignments of rocks that seem to be maybe ritual stages or some kind of areas that demarcate altars or platforms or something like that demarcate the ritual space from the non-ritual space. And so we put another excavation unit in over here to understand this line of rocks right here and maybe what was happening behind it. And here is Andres and Javi excavating unit 1. Okay. Now, notice the soil over here is really, it's gray. This is thick lens of ash here, which tells us there's a lot of burning in this area. Now, just some artifacts to show you that we excavated here. We did find several, and we haven't identified these yet positively, but we found several immature cobs of corn, what appear to be immature cobs of corn. Okay? And these are, you can see how small these are. This is about an inch long here. And then over here in unit 2, we actually found what appears to be the very edge of a plaster floor. We haven't traced it out all the way yet, but there does seem to be, there is an artificial floor here. Now we know from other projects in this region, especially down into southern Belize, that there are, that it was not uncommon. It was actually fairly common that Maya people would build platform floors in the caves. So this tells us that they're creating these ritual stages. And talk about massive architecture. This whole entrance of the cave over here was actually built up and held in place by this artificial wall. This rock here, we haven't pulled these out, but this rock here is about 4 feet long and about 2 feet tall, just to give you some sense of scale here about how big this is. Okay? So this is actually, let me close out of here, this actually creates this whole artificial platform here that blocks the actual entrance of the cave. So now we can go down in and see the formations. And we look around, going through some of the dirt that was that may have been from the original excavation in 1928. We actually found the end of a bone tube, a polished bone tube. Don't know what animal it's from, but this is it's perhaps a musical instrument of some kind, or maybe some kind of other ritual device. We're not really sure yet what it was used for, or what its purpose was. But it was found in a disturbed context. But really interesting artifact here. All right, we drop down into the cave, and over here, up against this column, You can see the gray soil over here again. Zoom in here a little bit. This gray soil right here. This is actually an ash lens telling us that this column, actually it's not really even a column, it's just part of the cave wall, was a ritual, a focus of ritual acts. There's half of me. And then over here, what we see is there's a series of windows up against this wall that had been, this is a window down into the interior of the cave, and here's another one right here. These were blocked up in the past. There's enough rubble down here that these windows would have been completely filled in. And with the modifications to the entrance, it seems like they're actually they're blocking light from going further into the cave. They're playing with shadows. All right. Go further into the cave, and we reach what the mason called the Cathedral, this massive, high-ceilinged chamber. These are those windows right here that I just showed you. You can see some of the rubble right there. And this is the other one right here. This massive chamber. And there's two routes you can go. You can climb up under here and pop out the other side and come up here. Or there's a wall here, an ancient Maya wall, that led to what Mason called a labyrinth. And it very much is. It's a very constricted area that's filled with twisting and turning passages. But in 1928, Mason, the archaeologist working here, pulled out dozens of jars from here. In fact, he pulled out dozens of jars from the cave. But there's still more. There's actually evidence of many more of them in here. Moving up, this is now looking down into the chamber down below that we were just looking at. And what seems to be a central focus of this cave, by its nature, is this column here. And Mason wrote about this, and he spent a lot of time. He said that at first when he saw it, he thought it was not real. He thought it was built, it was not natural. He said he thought it was built by the Maya, but he eventually came to the conclusion that it was in fact a natural formation. But he said it looked like a snarling beast. And look here. And this is what it looks like. Now, throughout here, behind it, we see charcoal pits. This was this actually was a focus of ritual attention here. Now, one of the things that he talks about quite a bit is this shape right here. So if we zoom in, what we can actually see is that these were formations here that had been chopped off in the past. And some of them actually do have some regrowth on them, which tells us that this was a modification that was made in antiquity. So what might the purpose have been for that? Well, doesn't that pop up here? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. When lit, backlit, this modified feature casts this shadow on the wall. It's a fierce, toothed visage, right? Really aggressive looking character. Now this was shot by, this picture was taken with flashlight, but imagine Maya were in here with torchlight. And remember, they had blocked off the entire entrance with rock walls to block the sunlight from coming in. So backlit, when this is lit by torchlight, which is going to be dancing around, right? And moving and shimmering, this visage, this fierce looking visage would have been dancing. It would have been dancing on the cave wall, right? It would have been moving. It would have been something that was alive. Right? And can't see it in this model here, but it's something that would have been visible to anybody who was standing down below. So we get a sense of show here, right? Of theatrics here, of this coming up here and burning incense and performing a ritual and conjuring this zoomorphic entity. Right? Now, just to give you a sense of scale, we've just kind of moved back on the column a little bit to see how big this is. This is Javi standing on the other side of that the other side of the feature. So this is the bulbous part of it right here. So the bulb itself is about where the face would be, is about the size of a person. And so this is a massive formation. Oops, went the wrong way. Well, we haven't spent too much time in the back of the cave, but this leads to, there's a steep drop that you can't see very well here, but there's a steep drop that goes down in the back of the cave behind that formation. And in there, that labyrinth seems to continue. We're not sure if it connects with in front of the cave, but that labyrinth is filled with broken jars. A lot of them, unfortunately, have fresh breaks on them, meaning they were broken more recently. But some of them, a lot of the breaks are ancient too. But this cave is filled with pottery. And like Achtung Loch, the very back of the cave has a small stream running through it. And actually Mason found, when he investigated this cave in the 1920s, he actually found these, some crude vessels buried back here. And so we get, again, these are the same kind of votive vessels that were being offered at Achtung Loch. And just like that, we're at the beginning. So it looks like, for sake of time, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to bring you to one more cave, and then I'll talk to you about contextualizing all this and what all of this means. And this is Cave C, or if you've been to Belize or are from Belize, this is the Rio Frio Cave. And this is a massive cave, and through it flows the Rio Frio. And this is just on the corner of a hillside. And it's a massive cave. For a sense of scale, again, here is me. I'm about 6 feet tall. That's looking straight up. And here is a person standing on the edge looking over. Now this is the beach that I like to bring my staff to. They tell me that Belize has other kinds of beaches, but I think this one's pretty beautiful. So they seem to they seem to want to go to other beaches, but you know. But this is my beach. So this is a massive cave, but you can see both ends of it. You actually don't need light to see through here. It gets a little difficult to navigate through here. You kind of have to shimmy along the walls to get through it. But this is the other side of it. You can walk through this massive cave. It just cuts through the hillside right here. And let's see. So we've only mapped this cave. When Mason was working here, if you visited this cave, this is the main ledge in the cave up here. All this will be underwater at different points of the year, different times of when it floods. But Mason had excavated a big platform over here. And what he said was very different than what he found here was very different than what he found in the other cave, in Cave A. Whereas cave A had a lot of jars, this one had almost none. This is a lot more bowls and plates and things like that. And so we do see some different ritual activities here. All right, so let me go back now. With those cave tours to begin to contextualize this, to make sense of this. To do that, what we need to do is think about worldview. Worldview is the way that people understand the world and how it works. So why was it, these caves were everywhere, so people would have been in them, but why were people performing rituals in these caves? Why are the Maya performing rituals in these caves? What was the purpose of them? What did they serve? Well, if we look at parts of Mexico, other parts of Mexico, both in the historic colonial period, in the recent times, and we can trace these ideas back to the distant past too. Caves were places of creation. They were places the ancestors emerged from. So the Aztec have the story of what they call Chicomostoc, which means 7 caves. And for the Aztec, Chicomostoc, 7 caves, there were seven founding lineages. Each of them had a lobe in the cave. So caves were places where ancestors were from. And we see something similar among the Maya. This is a pre-classic mural from the site of San Bartolo in Guatemala. And what we see here, perhaps, what we see here is the creation of the world. We see 4 couples, 4 males and 4 females. 1, 2, 3, 4 females. 1, 2, 3, 4 males. Okay. Seemingly the 4 founding couples. But these 2 individuals here are actually also carrying bundles above their heads, perhaps ancestors. Now, this here, to the left of this scene, is a stylized mountain. And this long feathered serpent that comes out, that makes the road that they're standing on, that's breathing out over here, it symbolizes rain. Right? So this is a cave breathing out breath. And it could be that these are the 4 founding ancestors, 4 founding lineages. Okay? And this hieroglyph, this is actually later used as a hieroglyph, means lok, or to emerge. And so this does suggest that this is the emergence of people, the emergence of the ancestors, right? At the origins of the world. Going back to Mexico, in Acatzingo Viejo, archaeologists recorded 7 caves, right, that were ritually used in a town. Unfortunately, one was destroyed by a road. Right? So we see this sort of emergence from the underworld as a common theme. It's something that happens at the origins of time. We see this with Olmec monuments. Olmec is a group from to the west of the Maya area. Here is a individual emerging out of a niche. There's a ruler emerging out of a niche. Right. Again, we see these themes of emergence and underworld, of the origins of people, the origins of power, coming from caves. In Oaxaca today, people people say they come from Soko Usha, means the 7 caves. Right? It's where the community Nuyutekos came from. It's where the ancestors go after they move on from the land of the living. So we see this association with caves and ancestors, ancestral emergence, and ancestors returning. So perhaps what I'm seeing here in Guatemala was that this is an ancestor shrine. What we do know from elsewhere is that chert flakes that weren't systematically created, they were just knocked off of cores like this, are commonly found with river snail shells. And we get thick layers of those, and sometimes obsidian flakes mixed in as well, that are laid down over burials, right? So we do have strong evidence pointing to that this might have been an ancestor shrine in the late Classic period at Conquin. We also know that caves, besides ancestors, caves were the homes of earth forces, or at least homes or places where you could connect with and commune with earth forces, particularly rain and the god or force of agricultural fertility. Right? As the place of the original ancestors, there's already this idea of fecundity or fertility, origins and fertility associated with caves, and this gets extended into the beliefs about agricultural fertility as well. Today, and I don't have pictures because there's no pictures of him, but there's a being known as the Earth Lord among many Maya communities, various names, but translated in English to Earth Lord, who owns the wilderness, who owns all the natural things, including the land that people farm on. And so when people go to make their fields, they actually have to go and they perform rituals in the caves to the Earth Lord to ask for his permission and to give him thanks for allowing them to use his land to grow their crops. Rain, too, comes from caves. Here, this is actually a stucco statue of the rain god Choc from the Classic period, from a cave in Guatemala. Not one that I worked in, unfortunately. I would have loved to have seen this in person. But this is a statue of a stucco figure of the rain god Choc sitting on a throne at the entrance of the cave from the late Classic period. Here is Choc, the rain god, sitting in a stylized cave. Okay. So there's this association with the caves, with caves and rain. And this is probably best seen at the site of the cave site of Balancanche in Yucatan. This cave was discovered in the 1960s, and the cave had been really well known. It was a tourist cave, but they actually found a passage that had been blocked off, and they went through and they came across this, which is this massive column here surrounded by incense burners that had the visage of the face of the central Mexican rain god, Tlaloc, who's the post-classic version of Choc, the rain god. So what we see, again, is this connection between rain and caves. And these sensors were focused around this column here coming down the middle of the cave. We also see cave formations carved with simple faces, commonly associated with water, thought to be representations of the rain god. This is from Cueva de los Andasolos in Chiapas, Mexico. And this is a slate cave that I worked in around Pogbatoon. You can make out very subtly some faces right here. Simple faces, 2 eyes and a mouth. 2 eyes and a mouth. Over here is 2 eyes and a mouth. And there's a few others over here as well. Now, when it rains, the water percolates through the hillside up above. This is actually right at the entrance of the cave. But the rain percolates through the hill up above, and the backside of the formation here, where this is orange, actually flows. Water gently flows over here. So we see the marking of faces with flowing water. And this is something too that colleagues of mine in Yucatan up north have also recorded extensively as well. These really simple faces associated with underground water. So why did the Maya associate caves with rain? Well, it goes back to geography. Caves are the drains of the landscape. They also maintain different temperatures than the outside, than the surrounding humid jungle. And so in the mornings, in the evenings, when the cool air, the cool moist air of the cave meets the hot humid air of the jungle, we see clouds form in the entrances of caves, right? And fog rises up from caves. We walk into a cave during the rainy season. The ceiling drips, right? It rains inside of caves. And in many cases, the water flows in and out of caves, like in Cave C. So there's springs and water flowing in and flowing out of caves. There's water dripping from the ceiling. Clouds, what look like clouds, form at the cave entrances, and those rise up into the heavens and produce rain. So this idea, this worldview then, is probably best expressed in this much earlier Olmec monument from the site of Chalcatzingo in Morelos, called Monument 1 or El Rey. And it shows here a cave in profile with breathing out, right? It has an eye, just like the San Bartolo mural. It's breathing out, it's exhaling this breath, right? And up above here are rain clouds. It's pouring. These are drops of rain and lightning, or maybe plants growing, right? This cave is producing the rain. It's producing the weather. Okay. So going back to these offerings, how then can we understand these votive offering bowls? These greenstone objects and the altar at the back of Achtung Loch. Well, if you remember, I said the votive offerings were used to burn incense. Right? Incense produces black smoke. Rain clouds are black smoke. Jade is symbolically associated with fragrant things, and it's associated with wind, especially the life-giving wind that brings the rain. And in this case here, with Achtung Loch, with the altar in the back, it produced this massive fire. The fire was actually so large here that the smoke, I'm talking about theatrical performance, the smoke would have been pouring out of the entrance of the cave. It was so hot and so the smoke was so thick. Right? The cave was they were trying to make the cave breathe with this ritual here. Right? And why burn incense? Because incense is the food of the gods. Copal is how the gods eat, what the forces eat. It's what's used to appease them. So these are some very small rituals that we performed at the beginning and the end of the field season to thank the hill and to thank the inhabitants of the hill for allowing us to have a successful season, for allowing us to go into the cave. And so these were, right? Incense was the food for the gods. There's this association with rain, right? And we can see then again, the focus on these columns, right? This interest in making the caves breathe, to make the crops grow, right? To make sure the world works properly. So what can we say about Maya cave rituals then? Is that these really were ways that Maya people used to commune with the forces of the earth and with the ancestors. It's the way to make sure that the world worked properly and that people were being fed and living life the way they were supposed to. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, because I know we're a little bit over time here. So thank you to the Institute of Archaeology and my staff and everybody you see here. And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Thank you, John, for tonight's talk, and thank you for everyone who's attending. We will have time to answer a few questions. So just as a reminder, you can input your questions in the Q&A feature on your Zoom control panel. And I am Dante Ferenga, the Development and Marketing Director of the San Diego Archaeological Center, and I'll be moderating today's Q&A portion. So I think we already have a handful of questions. Is there any evidence of a use of red ochre in the cave sites?
That's a really good question. Some, yes. Nothing that I've come across directly. I know there's some hieroglyphic texts in the caves in Chiapas, especially that have red pigment. They put red lines around the hieroglyphic texts in the caves. I'm not sure if that's red ochre or not. However, fortuitously, I will point you to one of my colleagues' work. They just published, I think late last year or earlier this year, probably late last year or early last year, actually an ochre mine up in the Yucatan, a Paleo-American one. So it looks like some of the first people to come to the Americas and at least go to in the Maya area were going into the caves specifically to get some of these mineral pigments. So there's nothing immediately springs to mind about that later on, but I know very early, at least they just published that just recently.
Are there cave systems under smaller cities such as Altun Ha and Caracol?
Altun Ha, I don't believe so. Caracol, those are two cities in Belize, two sites in Belize. Caracol, there are caves around Caracol. As far as I know, none have been discovered directly underneath it. But with the same concept here, a lot of caves in the late Classic period would actually have roads going out from the main centers down to the entrances of the caves. So that's another way that the caves were being controlled by the elite. So again, I don't know for certain if there's caves underneath Caracol, but I know there's plenty around it.
Were the artifacts in danger of looting? With 3D technology, why not leave the pots in the cave?
Yes, and that's actually one of the focuses of the project is to have these reconstructions like this so that I can bring people there to the caves and document the material. But yeah, the Rio Frio Caves are actually they are quite literally right next to the road that goes down to Caracol. And so people can drive up. It is in a national forest, and so it's a bit protected, but there's no security guards at these sites or anything like that. So these caves in particular, I wouldn't say in particular, but there's no security at them, and so yes, they certainly are in danger, and they're visited by tourists regularly. People will go down. So the last question was about Caracol. People will actually go down to Caracol and stop at these caves on the way back, and so we've, over the course of 2 weeks, we probably came across about 10 groups of tourists that came through. So they're visited often, and yes, there's threats to looting there.
Are all the pottery sherds remaining in the caves left as intentional offerings, as whole vessels, or are there signs that certain areas of a cave would be designated as a place for midden? Would there be a way to tell if there was a taboo against throwing things away inside the cave during the period in which the caves were active ritual sites?
Okay, that's a really good question. So it looks like it's a really fascinating question because there's been some smaller caves that people have completely excavated, and they'll find an entire pot except for one piece about so big, or whatever the size is. And so it looks like sometimes they were breaking things intentionally in there and taking a piece out with them. But the vessel's not the offering. The vessel has the essence of the offering within it, and so when it breaks, it's not necessarily that it's not a sacred thing anymore. It's the essence, the sacred essence is transferred to something else. And so, in that way, they're not going to be sacred offerings. Now, in terms of being dumps or not, there's a really interesting ethnography, again, a report of a current group of Maya living up in Yucatan that that talks explicitly about the concepts of sacredness, and it looks at it from a Maya perspective versus a Western perspective. And for this group of Yucatec Maya, they were not, the caves are not sacred themselves. They become portals that through ritual action. So you go and you perform a ritual, and it takes on a sacred place, and the act traps the essence of the force, right? So it even says, you know, that's why I didn't say God specifically, but earth forces. It captures the essence of that force that can be communed with at that time. And then when the ritual's over, it unchains the force, and then it just goes back into the ether. And so the cave's not sacred. It's just it's a place that can be, that the ancestors and the forces can be communed with, right? And certainly there are caves too in the centers of some sites, or like cracks in the ground that seem to be, yeah, just, you know, places where you can just dump your garbage and not worry about it.
In central Mexico, there are many small mountains in a mound form that remind me of temples, like the one you showed near the beginning of your presentation that contained ancient artifacts. Do you think some of these mountains in Mexico or Guatemala are actually overgrown temples, or have archaeologists discovered pretty much all the temples, and if it's not known as a temple site, then it's just a mountain?
We have not discovered everything. And I also say too that, you know, local communities know the sites that are around. So archaeologists don't really discover, especially in the Maya area, we don't discover anything. We're brought there by our local collaborators. Javi, who I showed you throughout this talk, I've been working with him for 10 years, and he's brought me to every site I know. And so I would say that, so they're perhaps unknown to science, but science hasn't recorded every single site. I would say, well, I don't know, unless I knew exactly the mountains. But there is something I didn't say explicitly during the talk, is that the work that I did in Guatemala, there is a thing about worldview. There is cognitive overlap between caves and pyramids, or pyramids and temples on top, and caves and mountains. And so they're kind of used the same. So I would say that there wouldn't necessarily be a distinction like that being made by the inhabitants if that was the case. So it's possible they were used something similar to temples, but again, as communicating places to interact with these forces.
Is the massive burning you describe evidence of continued use for a long time, or one-time events such as termination rituals?
Another good question. Unfortunately, we only have one radiocarbon date from there, so I can't say with certainty. But the date we do have lines up perfectly with the date of that bowl from the entrance of the cave. And so it does suggest that even if it wasn't, you know, the same, just one event, it does look like that it was performed during the same time period, probably during the same decade. And the part of that could be, yes, that a lot of the charcoal could be evidence of extensive use, but we know, I know through circumstantial evidence of really dumb luck, that there was a very intense fire there, which does suggest that there was a big fire there that was probably responsible for it. So I wanted to find out what was burned there, so we did called flotation. I took the soil we excavated and put it in water, and all the burned material would float to the top, and all the soil and ceramics and stuff would float to the bottom. Well, when I poured the soil, when I poured the excavated material into the water boiled instantly, and like it was like, you know, flying out like this. I had no idea what was happening, and so doing a little bit of research into that, it turns out that burning limestone creates quicklime, and it has to reach a certain high temperature to do that. And so that would suggest that there was at least one time that the fire got hot enough that actually chemically transformed the cave walls into quicklime that got down into the soil. So that does suggest at least one intensive burning. Again, I don't have the range of dates to know if that was right, if that was it, or if because they could do a fire there 100 times. If it didn't reach that heat, it would never transform, but it did reach that heat at least one time. So I can't say with certainty, but it does fit with the overall chronology of the rest of the use of the cave, that it's late terminal classic period and probably sometime in the mid 820s to 830s or so.
Are there differences in rituals conducted in dry versus flooded caves?
Flooded caves, if the water's flowing in them, we have very little evidence of that, because that would have been washed away. It's also a difficult question to answer, because we tend to work in the dry season, and the wet season is right in the middle of the semester, when we can't really get down there. So one of the caves that I worked on at Pogbatoon, we happened to be a really wet week, and the cave was bone dry. Normally, we were in there during a wet week, and it was pouring. We got wetter inside the cave than outside the cave. It was raining so much from the ceiling, and it was just from the dripstones up above. And there's little streams and little puddles and small little stream going through the cave. So so can't really say much more to it than that, because I'm never down there enough to know which caves would be flooded during the rainy season or not. But there are differences, like I said, between the Rio Frio Caves A and C, just in terms of the artifacts. Mason found those jars in the cave with the column, but he didn't find any jars in the cave with the river flowing through it. He found other types of plates and bowls and things like that. So there are some differences, but I think we're still trying to tease out what those differences might be.
You mentioned a portion of a skull was found in one of the caves. Any evidence of burials?
Yeah, there were a lot of human remains in the caves I worked in Guatemala that unfortunately had been dug up by looters in the past and just sort of strewn around everywhere. Less so in Belize. In the caves that I worked in, I know in southern Belize especially, there's a lot of rock shelters that have burials in them. In adjacent parts of Guatemala too, there's been some actual probably royal tombs or high level elite tombs found in caves. But I will say, fortuitous that I haven't encountered many human remains in caves before. And so we did find some possible human bone in the entrance of Cave A, but it was in really bad shape, so we can't say much more about it than that.
What is the earliest usage of Cave A as per ceramic or burning ritual evidence? Has there been other evidence of food or plant life found in Cave A other than the corn cob?
So, okay, so I think we have about 4 corn cobs in total. And they're unfortunately sitting in the Institute of Archaeology right now, waiting to be exported. I had packaged them up to get radiocarbon dating when I last time I was down there in December 2019, but then COVID hit. And so we don't have any radiocarbon dates, although I have material that's waiting to be down there if I get permission to export it. Ceramically speaking, it was really frustrating. We dug where those ceramics were, and we didn't have very many good temporal diagnostic pieces. And so it looks like though we have a few early classic period pieces, but most of it is undiagnostic. And but the majority of the diagnostic pieces point to late classic, which is common in Belize, with a little bit of early classic.
Are the surrounding landscapes where the Rio Frio Caves are located and the surrounding areas within your current research area unique compared to other archaeological sites in the area dating back to the late classic to terminal classic period?
Can you ask that again?
Okay, so asking basically if the caves at your site and in the areas that you're researched, are they unique compared to other archaeological sites in the area from the same time period?
Yes and no. One of the fun things about working in caves, and one of the more frustrating things about working in the caves, is that every single cave is different, and so and people were using them in different ways. but for these, because of these overall themes. So, and you know, every single cave site is unique on its own. It's just structurally they're vastly different, which creates different types of environments for people to do things in. And so that, you know, in that way they're unique. But in terms of the artifact assemblages and things like that, I haven't actually been working in the Rio Frio Caves long enough yet. My project just started in 2018. I had a short season, then I had the field season in 2019. So this is a brand new project that is unfortunately put on hold because of COVID. So, so what I think what's unique right now about this area is that there's been no long-term study of the caves in this here. So the caves A and C that I talked about were excavated in 1928, and until I started working there in 2018, so 90 years later, that was the only work that had been done there. And so they're unique in terms of the lack of scientific knowledge about archaeological knowledge about the region, but they're not necessarily unique in terms of what kinds of things were being done there.
Can you please discuss caves being the mouths of the underworld and their connection to Flower Mountain, butterflies, and hummingbirds in the ancient Maya religion?
Probably not very well in the time remaining. So I would urge you to look at the work of Carl Taube. He was actually my dissertation advisor, but and especially the work that he wrote on San Bartolo murals goes into a lot of detail about that. But essentially, caves are the Maya area was considered by Mesoamerica to sort of be this place of paradise. And looking at broad climatological patterns throughout Mesoamerica, the winds blow from over the Caribbean, over the Maya area, down and over into central Mexico. So the wind comes from the east, right? The rain-bringing wind comes from the east and provides the Maya area in central Mexico with the life-giving rain. And so there's this association with the Maya area as a Mesoamerican paradise. And that's where the butterflies and birds, just to summarize it really quickly, kind of comes in from. And again, the symbolism I talked about at the very end with the clouds forming in the mouths of caves, that you know that rain, right? Those kinds of clouds that you see. I mean, if you go up on the hillsides in the mornings and the evenings, you actually see the entire valleys filled, just covered in light fog, and that's this. You know, I mean, that's the same thing that the clouds are. They're just down on the land, and so right, there's this the cave it's coming from the caves, and you have the water flowing in and out of the caves, right? These massive landscape drains, and so the hills are perceived, the mountains are perceived as giant containers of water. And in fact, that's actually there's some evidence from post-classic central Mexico that shows that talks about gods pouring jars of water down, and that's the land, or the rain, right? And so there's an association with these jars as water containers being symbolic mountains that are filled with water, right? So that's actually probably what those jars are doing in the caves. So you get this right, the eastern area, it's also filled with caves, when central Mexico is not necessarily filled with caves. It's a different geology, right? So you get this paradisical eastern place where the wind comes, right? And the wind is coming from the caves, and that's right. To do it, and trying to do it justice in about 3 minutes is what I'll say about that is. But yeah, check out the work of Carl Taube. He's written quite a bit about that.
So I think we have time for only 1 or 2 more questions. If we do not get to your question, you're welcome to email them to Stephanie, and we will pass them along to Dr. Spenard.
I can also hang out for a few more minutes too.
And we'll keep going for a little bit.
Okay.
All right. Have you found any chemical residue evidence suggesting the use of mind-altering drugs in the Maya rituals?
Very good question. We actually just published a couple book chapters on the initial results of that. We were actually looking for, we found some bone tubes similar to the one I showed, And we're looking for, we're targeting specifically for Datura, which is morning glory. And we didn't find very good evidence of it. That's not to say that it's not there, but the type of study we did was specifically targeted for that. I think maybe one vessel showed perhaps there might be evidence for it. But that's still actually, that's an ongoing research project that we have right now. But there's if I can promote, we have a book on Pogbatoon that just came out, that there's a chapter in there about that. And then there's another book called Her Sweet Cup for Sweet Cacao that we also have a chapter in there as well that talks about some of that.
All right. Have any figurines or musical instruments been recovered from the caves you have worked in? Are there any other ritual artifact classes commonly associated with Maya rituals that have been recovered?
I have not, actually. Disappointed to say. Have found figurines are very rare. I think in my career I've found pieces of 2. Maybe I think an arm and just a piece of an applique stucco thing, but that's been about it. I do know in the site of Aguateca, Guatemala, my colleague, one of the picture I showed of the clouds rising up, she actually found the remains of several flutes from the caves in Aguateca. And there's been some figurines coming out of Guatemala too that, so a lot of the figurines actually have clay balls in them, so they're rattles, and some of them have whistles on them as well. So there's sort of an overlap between figurine and musical instrument. But I unfortunately have not found any, and it's extra disappointing too, because at Pogbatoon, they've found a ton of musical instruments there. But none seem to have made it into the caves.
Right. Was the chert nodule plastered onto the cave wall or shoved into the cave wall?
It was just stuck in a niche. Like somebody found a perfect little hole for it, went and left it there.
Has there been any testing done to determine the material being burned as incense by the ancient Mayas?
Yes and no. So I did, one of the graduate students on the Pogbatoon project worked with me, Megan Parker, and she did the Paleoznobotny of the caves at Pogbatoon. And she did a lot of the analysis and found that most of the burned material, a good portion of the burned material, especially from Ochre Loch, I think somewhere about 95% of it was actually pine, and it was burned when it was wet. And so there's several different types of incense that Maya people would use, and pine was certainly one of them. And so it seems that part of the ritual at Ochre Loch, that altar, was using this wet pine to create this really aromatic pine smoke. We've found stuff the small little pieces of things that look like it's probably copal, which is the other kind of incense that's commonly used in the caves, but haven't tested it to see for certain. But we know that Maya people today use pine and copal, and elsewhere certainly this has been tested and been found to be copal. And actually it turns out they were using rubber as well, and would mix copal and rubber together and burn it as incense.
So there have been a couple of questions asking if you take archaeology students or if you're going to start a field school in Belize.
I've taken a few. So the students, the folks on my project I showed before, were students at Cal State San Marcos, and I'm trying to get a field school up and running. But that's a few years down the road, but it's certainly something to look forward to. Yeah.
Right. Were all Maya people able to access the caves, or were they admissible to only certain religious or societal status?
Another really great question, and that's I would say that's one that's debated, not fiercely, but certainly it seems like during the late classic period, at least, that the elite and rulers started to make explicit claims over those sacred spaces. But it seems very early on, even into the early classic, throughout the early classic period, it seems that these places were available to everybody. And one of the things I looked at in one of the publications that just came out that I was just mentioning in the Her Cup for Sweet Cacao, we were trying to use the plants to identify specifically if we could see who was using the caves. And there is no good evidence either way. We couldn't get a good answer. There is the Spanish conquistadors wrote about that only men were allowed in the caves, but we don't know if there was cultural bias there, if the practices have changed. Certainly there's biological female skeletons recovered from the caves. It has been recovered from the caves. Somebody asked about Achtuntuni Chilmacnal at the beginning of the talk. That one of the skeletons in there is female. So, you know, the situation that brought them in there, we don't know for certain. We know that their life ended there and they never came out, but you know, if they were brought in there alive or dead or what, we don't know for sure. Or you know, the purpose of that, or at least I don't know for certain what the purpose was. So no, I would say there's not really good evidence outside of, it seems that in the late classic period, the elite are starting to make very explicit claims that certain places at least were being used. My thinking about it is that there's so much modification to such small places that everybody has access to these, to at least something that's considered a cave to perform their rituals in. We have about 70 caves around Pogbatoon that have been identified, and every single one has some kind of modification architecture in it. You know, and I've only been to a few of the ones that my local collaborators know around there. So just by sheer numbers alone, if an elite person went to just one cave a day or two caves a day, that's all they'd be doing, is going there and burning stuff and going on to the next one and burning stuff. And they had other stuff to do. They were taking care of the state, right? That state business to take care of. They're not spending all their time underground, but certainly important times of the year they were underground.
Were there any notable faunal remains found near the artifacts?
No. No, that's the other thing that I've at both Pogbatoon and here, I have very little faunal remains in the caves. Common even bat bones are somewhat rare when I've excavated.
All right, someone asked, what's the biggest cave that
I've been in, or that in the world?
I'm not sure, just that was the question.
Well, so Cave C is big. Tuni Chilmacnal that's come up a few times is long. It's several kilometers. I think it's 5 kilometers long or something like that. Down in southern Belize, there's the Chiquibul system that extends into Guatemala, and that's kilometers long, and those are massive caves down there, similar to what I showed at the beach in Cave C. You know, there's in terms of in the world, I think in Georgia, the country of Georgia, there's I think that's the biggest cave in the world, the deepest. But you know, there's famous cave, I think it was in Vietnam now, that was just identified a few years ago that you can fly a helicopter into. So you know, I mean, there's big caves, and there's certainly big caves that haven't been identified yet, or at least recorded by science yet, that are still to be found.
What do you think about the tourist cave tubing in the Belize caves? I'm
not sure the function of that question, but you know, I think tourism is a really important part of the economy in Belize, and I think if it's done respectfully, then you know, I've never done it. I've heard it's fun. But yeah, you know, tourism is a very important part of the Belizean economy, and the country's been hit very hard right now because of coronavirus and having to shut down. And I know a lot of my friends and colleagues down there are suffering because of the loss of income, and including the loss of my research down there and other research projects down there. So you know, we see the effects now of the lack of those kinds of things having a great impact on the country now and our community partners. So you know, it's an important part of the economy down there. So.
What route would the Maya use to enter or exit the region, and from what cities might they have come from to use these sites?
That's a question that I'm still trying to figure out. The research in the 1920s, the closest known sites were about 10 kilometers away, and then there was another cave that was identified in the 1960s that they were trying to prevent. That was actually it was being actively looted, and the Commissioner of Archaeology went there to try and catch the person red-handed. The person wasn't there, but they recorded this other cave, Rio Frio Cave E, in 1958, I think, early 1960s. And even then, the closest settlement is about 10 kilometers away. So, it's a big research question that I'm trying to address is, who was using these caves? Are they long distance pilgrimage destinations, which seems to be the case, although I have some evidence of there's some mounds in the area that haven't been recorded before. So, small households and houses and things like that. So, we'll see. We'll see in where that's going to go to in the future.
Were the jars found in the cave empty?
No. Mason actually says specifically that several of them had ash in it, and before his workers dumped the ash out before he could get to him and tell him not to. So so the ones that he collected originally weren't, and then they were collected and they were dumped out, and then they didn't have any. Now they were.
All right, we have another question that's more about the life of an archaeologist. Okay. So when you are excavating caves, where do you stay? Are you camping, or do you return to modern lodging at night?
Depends on where I'm at. When I was in Guatemala, I was camping in renovated is not even the right word, an abandoned farm hut, not even a hut. It was a structure. It was 4 posts and a thatch roof that leaked. About 8 of us were in this under this roof that was about 7 feet wide by about 10 feet long, and it leaked a lot when it rained, and it rained pretty much every night. So in that case, I was in a hammock, sleeping in a hammock in the middle of Guatemala. No amenities, nothing. They carved me a pulley for a bucket to take a shower with. And then more recently, when I worked on the Pogbatoon project, we actually stayed in town. We stayed at a hotel and would commute every day. And with my project down in the Rio Frio Caves now, I'm trying to figure out exactly where we're going to stay. It's a very long commute. It's about, by the time I pick up my crew and equipment, it's about a 2-hour one-way commute from town. So looking into different options, camping or trying to find a place up near the caves. Where we might be able to stay. So, but that's right now, that's one of the biggest, besides coronavirus, that's the biggest pressing issue is where I'm going to stay as I continue this research project.
From the top of the cathedral, were there acoustic tests done, since it's possible that musical instruments were found?
No musical instruments there. No formal tests were done. I'm trying to think. I remember that the cave. It's interesting because as you move through the different chambers of that cave, the sound quality becomes vastly different. So at one point, it's really muffled and you can't almost hear anything. But then you go, I think it's that chamber. If you're down low, I think that one. If I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while now since I've been in there. I think that one echoes fairly well. But then as you climb up and over where the column is and go past it. There's no echo there, and I think it's dampened by the stream down below.
Right. Someone's asked, how has your research benefited the current Maya community?
Okay, actually, let me. I'm going to step back to that other question before, and then I'll come back to this one because it's both really good questions. But I thought of something else. A couple of cool things in terms of musical instruments. We haven't found drums or wind instruments or anything like that. I have found in a couple caves where they've you can actually bang on the formation, some of the formations, and you can play on like a xylophone almost. And that was something that would have been noticed by the Maya. Some of the floors, if you stamp on the floor, it sounds hollow, and so that could have been a drumming sound. But I've also seen one instance, really cool. They took a block of a cave curtain and stuck it in a formation in such a way that you could actually play it, and it would ring like a xylophone, and that was in a really acoustic chamber, and so you could create a whole concert from this one block of stone stuck in these formations. So I think there's probably other types of music being made there that wasn't necessarily from instruments that we would find archaeologically necessarily. So to get the other question about how my research is benefiting the local community, so the Pogbatoon project, we worked very closely with the community of San Antonio, Maya community of San Antonio. And that project employed a large number of workers and provided regular income for over a decade now over the summer. Where I'm at now, the Rio Frio Caves are actually in the middle of a national protected area, and they're about 45 minutes away from any local community. The only thing that's right near the caves are a military base and a forest department outpost. And so that I'm continuing to work with Javi, who I mentioned before. He's from San Antonio, and I continue to employ folks from there and work with them. And Javi's a absolute vital part of my project, and he's done so much for me, and so he's a partner in this research with me.
Someone asked, are caves and temazcals related? Probably butchering that pronunciation.
Temazcals. Can that person clarify?
I will see if they're still on and there's a follow-up, I'll come back around to it.
Okay.
And is there any evidence of mushroom structures within these ritual caves that are being excavated?
Mushroom structures. No.
All right, I think we only have a couple questions left. And on a fun note, was that Bernie Sanders in a chair in your slides at the beginning?
There were 3. Yes.
All right, I think we're pretty much at the end of the questions. Let's see. Oh, we have 1 or 2 more. Is there a jaguar temple site currently under excavation in Central America that you know of?
I've heard of something in Nicaragua, I believe, that I think is called something similar, but I don't know much about the project, so I can't speak to it.
And why did they put pottery in with the rocks for the steps and the platforms?
For a couple different reasons. We actually, a lot of the structures in the cities and the villages and the towns would have been that we find that in architectural fill, and part of it is that you're looking at a settlement that's 2,000 years old, and pottery doesn't really ever break down, and so there's just a lot of it laying around. And so I think part of it is that they're probably taking their middens and dumping it in when they're building the building. So part of it's getting rid of the trash. But I think in the case of the hillside, this is something that's really unique and not, cave archaeologists tend to work in caves, not outside of caves. And so that's, something like this hasn't, not that it's never been recorded before, but I think a lot of it has to do with stabilization and just getting rid of, keeping the area clean. But I think the pottery helps consolidate these steps, and it's a way to keep the structures, the steps secure enough that they're not going to slide down the hill.
All right, we got a follow-up on that question about the temazcal. If a cave is seen as the origin of the gods, of birthing the gods, does the steam bath or the temazcal, still in use today, represent a symbolic cave?
I see. Okay. I knew the word. I couldn't place it though. Thank you for the clarification. There's a lot of symbolic overlap between caves and sweat baths, and my colleague Holly Moyes has written about that in the cave in Belize about finding a sweat bath there. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of symbolic overlap there, with the sweat baths being also a place of birth. Women will give birth in going to sweat baths as part of the as part of giving birth. And so I think, you know, that's tied in with the ancestor emergence from the caves and that. So yeah, there's a lot of symbolic overlap there. I just had I open up the Q&A watching, and I see I'll just Terrence, if you're there. So I actually can tell you now, I worked on I helped when I was a field school student, helped get that cave, worked on that cave, and learned to do cave archaeology there. This is the late 90s or so, and yeah, it's still I don't know how it is now since last year, because I haven't been able to down since because of COVID, but it's still one of the major draws, tourist draws in the country, one of the major archaeological sites in the country. And there's still, well, again, because of COVID, things I'm sure have calmed down. I don't know the situation on the ground, but certainly there, it's one of the biggest draws, and they still have to limit permits there. And in terms of contemporary Maya, about the impact of that place, that's actually something I'll kind of get to a little bit in my talk, but if I don't touch on it directly, this portion of Belize was largely depopulated at the end of the Classic Period. And so the people who live there today are not, the Maya who live there today are not direct descendants. There's been several migrations since the collapse around 900 or so when that cave was being used. And so the descendants of the people who were using it are not living in the area today. And we can't say with certain who was living there. So, you know, I think it's a sacred place, but there's not a deep ancestral connection there like you might have with places in California, for example.
John, can you specify what cave you're speaking about?
Oh, sure. So Terrence in the chat mentioned Achtung Tuni Chul McNall cave, which is one of the cave in Belize. It's not one we're going to be talking about tonight, but it's like I said, it's one of the big tourist caves.
All right. Well, there were plenty of comments of people saying they very much enjoyed your talk and enjoyed all of this evening. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you had a few, and you just had one more from Carla Wan, who said it was a pleasure meeting you at the last Archaeological Symposium, and she looks forward to your work at the Rio Frio Cave area.
Oh, thank you very much.
So yeah, we had plenty of people who very much enjoyed your talk. So excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Spenard.
Thanks, Dante.
And thank you to everyone for attending tonight's living room lecture. Our series continues in March with Polynesian Contact with the Americas with Dr. Terry Jones on March 18th. And for more information on this and other upcoming events, please visit our website, sandiegoarchaeology.org. Thank you.